My name is Leo Martinez. I'm with the Chico Bonsai Society, and today we're going to be talking about air layering. Now, air layering is something. What is it? Number one, then why do we do it? When do we do it? How do we do it? But right now we'll start off with what it is. And air layering is taking a tree, an existing tree or an existing plant, and actually doing a cutting, not like you would a cutting, right on the tree itself. And that's establishing a new set of roots so that we can use a part of the tree that would be something more attractive, or maybe the rest of the tree was damaged, but we wanted to use the best part of the tree that would show as a bonsai. Well, this particular one here is a Trident maple. It's an older tree. You can see it's been old. It has kind of a gnarly look to it in many cases. But the tree as a whole doesn't have a real appeal to it. So in this case, we're going to be doing an air layering of this to try to pick the best of this tree and see what we can do to do an air layering and end up with actually two trees. But one, the prime will be to get the top tree, which would probably be the better of the two. Now not all trees are susceptible to air layering, number one, because I've tried it on redwoods. Redwoods, forget it. Conifers, doubtful. They just don't react well to this type of air layering. So those you have to rely pretty much on the standard rooting methods of trees and letting them grow. Now the maples and zelkovas, some of the other trees, the elms, these are all very susceptible. They're very receptive of an air layering process. So I'll get into the process here in a minute. Now, why do we air layer? Well, we want to get the best of the trees that we can from a tree without destroying the whole tree. So you'll end up with two trees. Now, one point to make on this, that air layering is not 100%. Some trees will make it, some won't. Now, when we get into the air layering process, and I'll show you the picture up here of a sketch that I've done, but once you do get the air layering process complete, the trees will react differently, and I'll get into that in a minute. All right, let's see. When's the right time? Now, air layering right now, April is a perfect month because the trees are just starting their growth spurt. They're coming out of dormancy and they're healthy, they're strong, and now's a good time to do that because we can force new roots. And we want to get that reactive growth in here of those new roots so that we can use those for the new tree. So we do that when the trees are healthy. Now let's see. Let's look at what we're going to do here today. Now in air layering, what we do with that air layering is we take a strip of the bark off of the cambium off of the tree itself. And you'll see here in just a sketch that I made here. Let's look at this as a tree. And that strip that we're taking out is we're taking a strip of that bark right off. Now once we take that strip of that bark off, we expose the main part of the bark, which is the true lifeline of the tree. And we leave that cut right up above. Now the size of the cut is usually the diameter of the tree. That's about the size of the length of the cut that we're going to take off. And the key to this whole thing now is to make a very clean cut, make sure everything's very clean. And what we'll do is we'll use sphagnum moss around that. We'll get into the details of that later so that the new roots can grow into that sphagnum moss. Now, when the roots are growing, they're not going to grow from the bottom part of the tree, the lower part. They're going to grow up in this area up in here. And this is where the rooting, we'll use a rooting hormone, which will accentuate or accelerate the root growth. And we'll apply that up in here when we get through this process. But the idea is to keep this a very clean edge. And then when we cover it up and we go through the process, but this right here is critical, this little piece right here. Because when you get under that cambium layer and over the main part of the trunk, that has to be real clean, a very clean edge. And that's what's going to foster the new roots. But now, let's pick a place on this one that we're going to be working on. And we've looked at this tree and had a couple of people look at the tree, and we've decided this upper part of the tree is going to be the one we want to keep. Now, if we want to keep this, if we cut it down in here, or earlier it down in here, we're going to have some lower branching that's kind of hard to deal with, although that's a possibility. If we take it down to here, that's one possibility. Then we'd have some lower branching, but we have a big gap here. So rather than have that big gap, we might have to sacrifice these two branches and take the air layer right about here. And if we take the air layer right about there, that gives us this upper part of this tree. And we'll still have to prune and shape and style this tree, but there's a big dead spot in this tree, a dead area here. Now that's going to have to be ground down a little bit, and it's kind of appealing. It gives it a little character. But then we'll have to pick up front of the tree, and you'll see that as we go, that there are different ways that we can look at this tree. So just picture this is going to be the upper part of the tree is going to be the new tree, and we'll still have the lower part down here to work with. But for the meantime, we may have to sacrifice a branch here in order to get the clean air layer there. So let's start with that. We'll see if we have to take that off. And we'll take this one here. We're going to have to sacrifice this branch. So we'll take that off right here. Now this one we'll save and see if we can try and make a cutting off of that, because it's a nice little tree. But the point here now is that we have this cut, and we're going to have to try to get this thing to grow. Now, where do we want that air layer? We want to do the air layer. We want to do it below this here and above that branch. So we're going to do it right about here. And the thickness of that air layer will probably be about here. So we'll take it right about this upper part. Right up above that nub there. And usually it can be a pretty clean process, but this one has kind of some knots and nubs here that we have to deal with. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to work with that. Now we'll be cutting up above this. The lower part will be about here. We'll be coming around about in here. And right above that branch. And I have a feeling we may have to sacrifice that branch just to make a good air layer. But well, let's have to see how we do the cut. Now to make the actual air layer itself, we have to cut away the bark. And that's what we're doing right here to get this part right here. And what we'll do is we'll have to find a place to go right around that. See where we can make a cut. Sometimes it's something very sharp to do that. We'll be cutting right around this. This is real touchy, so you have to be real careful with this, because you're dealing with some pretty sharp tools here in this case. Lower part we're going to be cutting right about here. When you're cutting this, I would recommend you do all the cuts away from you, so if you do slip, you don't stab yourself with the blades, because they're very sharp. All I'm doing now is just cutting into the bark. Getting ready to peel that off. What I'm doing now is just peeling off the actual bark right up to that cut that we just made around the tree. Now, by getting right to that cut, we want to keep that as clean as possible. so we don't get extra bark in there. There's a couple of schools of thought. One of them is one process where some people and have tried it, and it works sometimes and at other times it doesn't, is that they'll actually leave a strip of bark from the upper part of the cut to the bottom. Right here, they leave it right here. A strip of bark connecting this one to this one. Now that's one school of thought that they use it to stimulate the growth. What that can do a lot of times, which is what we're trying to avoid, is callousing. Because if you do it doesn't work quite right, you'll get a lot of callousing of the tree without the root growth. And you don't want the callousing, you want the root growth. So we'll have to try to get that. Bear with me here. This is a kind of a little sticky process that you get into here. The idea is to get as much of that cambium off, the bark off and get into the cambium layer underneath. There we go. It's usually a lot easier in this because you usually don't have all the nubs and the pieces of all these other pieces of these old cuts and things like that. But okay, little by little we'll get that. So the idea is to get that cleared off. Okay, now we've cleaned up the trunk as best we can, and the main thing is to get that upper part clear, very clean, this upper edge, because that's where we're going to get the activity on these roots, right up here in this upper part. That's where we want that reactive growth of the roots to come into that, and that'll be right here at this upper edge. So let's see, I think we're all set to go there. Okay, now our next step is to get the rooting hormone around this upper part of the cut. Now, this rooting hormone is not real good stuff to breathe in, so I would suggest you use a mask and kind of keep your hands away from it. But you're using a regular Q-tip or something just to get it on the upper part. Don't worry about the lower part so much, because you're not going to get roots coming up from the bottom part of this thing. You're going to get the roots coming up from the upper part. So here we go. Let's get some of this on there. Now we put it just on the upper part of the that cut and some of the exposed areas there. I think we've covered up pretty much what we want to do here. I think we're okay with that. Let's get this put out of the way here. Now the next step is going to be to put in the sphagnum moss. This gets kind of messy. The sphagnum moss is all it is a sphagnum peat moss. And what it is, it's a fine moss that will allow the roots to grow into it very easily. And the idea is it stays moist in this here, because once we pack it around, we're going to wrap the rest of the ball in plastic and then seal it. Now you're not going to have to water it or anything, because once it's sealed, then the moisture stays inside because the plastic is keeping it inside. A lot of people think you have to keep watering it or doing things to it. The idea is, unless it's a blazing hot sun, but that's another point we have to make, is that once you do this, you put this in a shady area and then let it rest. And this gets kind of messy, so we're going to be now this peat, I just added a little bit of water to it because if it's real dry, it won't mold. So I just added water to it so then we can use this to put right around the cut. And that's what we'll be doing right here. I'm going to do something else here that makes it a little easier. I'm going to put it right on a piece of plastic so we can wrap it. Then we'll have to seal it. And this stuff's pretty messy, so don't worry about being too neat. So you need about 3 hands. I'm just going to tie that little lower end here just for a minute, just to hold it together so I can fill the rest of it up. So I'm just using a little piece of wire just to hold the plastic on right now. Now we're filling the top up here around our cut. What we're doing we're right around the cut itself. So we're packing this all around there so those roots now will have a place to grow. This will be the medium that the roots can grow into. So there's not place you can't be too neat on this thing because it's pretty messy. But the idea is this to get things started that way. I'm just using a little piece of wire to tie this right now just to keep it from falling apart for a minute. Then we're going to tape it up tight. This other one. Okay, now we've wrapped that thing with plastic, tight, snug all around. You don't have to mess with the moisture of it anymore. You don't have to water it anymore. Just leave it alone. It'll go from 4 weeks. I'm using a little bit more wire just to snug it up a little bit. The idea now is that the roots will grow into that sphagnum moss, and that's the principle. And they'll grow into that so that we're going to get the new roots and we'll be able to cut it later. Now once, I said, put this thing away, put it into a shady area, leave it alone. Don't mess with it for, we'll say 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, up to 6 weeks sometimes. And then you can work with that. But don't mess with it, don't be picking at it. Don't be trying to do anything with it, water it or anything else. Just leave it alone. I'm just putting this on to make sure that plastic doesn't come loose. Now once it does grow, and the next phase is going to be the cutting phase. And cutting what we did here. And the cutting will be when we make our cut here to get rid of this lower part and make this upper part, and we'll use the roots from right there where they're coming into the new growth. Like I said, just don't get too nervous about it. Just let it sit. Like I said, maybe 3 to 6 weeks. Just kind of get the feel of it. It's not going to do much to the tree itself because the tree still has a lifeline, so it's not going to hurt it. But we just want those roots to develop. That essentially is the process. So now, after about the next session, we'll maybe have another few minutes, and we'll cut it apart and then see what we're going to do with it when we do that. That'll be another 4 to 6 weeks.